How rich and how moving is Paul's picture of creation that Michelle has just shared with us. And yet it's almost strange to imagine creation waiting, longing, groaning, hoping, seeking, laboring for liberation, for freedom. Those are such deeply human responses to the experience of life. If we remember last Sunday, Pastor Ryan helped us see creation's goodness and beauty, and that's separate from its usefulness for us as humans. This week, as we turn to Romans 8 and this personified look at creation, we might see creation through this oh-so-familiar lens of human experience. In its longing, hoping, and all those things I've named, creation is speaking our language, feeling our feelings, suffering our sufferings, and as we imagine it that way, we're now ready to listen with empathetic ears. Let's listen in. And as we do, if I might continue in this vein of personifying creation, we just might hear creation playing and singing its own song, a song of longing. Some of us in the roundtable team didn't have to think very hard about the times that we've heard creation singing a song of longing. If you were in town on that day in 2020, during the derecho, that was one of those places you could hear creation wail. One of our participants heard the howl or the growl even of wind rushing through tight spaces of an elevator shaft as they waited underground in a parking garage. Others may have heard it that day, like me, and the creaking and the cracking of branches and trees giving way to the wind. Consider the places, maybe even less dramatic than that one, that you've heard creation wail or howl or groan, as our passage has it today. We've spent a bit of time in the book of Romans over the last several months, and one of the things that we have noted there is just how lofty Paul's theology and vision are in this letter to the church in Rome. And so when we keep that in mind, I love that at the heart of this dense theological letter, we're called to listen in for creation's voice. Or as we've envisioned it today and in the midst of this series, for creation's song. However, not everyone on our roundtable team, as we approached this passage, was as enamored with it as I have been. Before we go there, though, I need to digress for just a moment and say how grateful I am that our roundtable team is meeting once more. We took a little break through the transition of the summer, but they have enriched my thought around these moments of time that we share together. So thanks to all of you who are on that team. And we want to create a feedback loop, so their names are in the bulletin, and you tell them how we're doing. One of the reasons I'm grateful for this team is because they pushed back against this very passage. And particularly that beginning part where human suffering seems to be belittled. The present sufferings are nothing compared to the glory to come, Paul said. Oh, that sounds so nice as long as you're not the one in the throes of suffering. We noted within our team how some forms of Christianity seem so bound to downplay suffering. None of us should feel comfortable with that. The other concern that we heard in our roundtable team was the way that some modern forms of Christianity are so otherworldly. They can only envision redemption as something apart from this good creation. Things will be better in some heaven light years away from this place. But that downplays what happens to us here in this life and what happens to what God has created and called good. Now, those are really important challenges as we come to this passage. I'm glad they were raised. I'm also glad that our team stuck with Romans 8 long enough to see there might be another way of hearing and reading. And as we did, we began to note ways that we might be able to hold on to hope for redemption without being naive or belittling those who suffer. The other thing that we noted as we stuck with it is this deep, deep connection between humanity and the rest of creation. Creation groans and longs for our human redemption because humanity and the rest of creation is intertwined. Now, that observation is deeply biblical. It harkens back to one of the earliest passages in the Bible, Genesis chapter 3. You may have heard that story called the fall, when Adam and Eve ate from that fateful tree. One of the outcomes of that story, as you might recall, was that all of creation was cursed because of one human's activity. Now, that was a poetic way in the time of explaining thistles and weeds and enmity between humans and the animal world. We may hear that story, and that may not sit well with our modern scientific sensibilities of how exactly thistles and weeds and enmity with animals came about. But what was claimed in Genesis 3 is still played out every day on this planet. Human behavior, let me start that over. Human behavior has profound impacts upon creation. I encourage you to reread it later, but I appreciate how nicely Ryan captured many of those places in this morning's call to worship. Humans degrade the earth, and creation groans for our shared redemption. But as Paul calls us to listen in to that groaning, we must wonder, does creation groan in futility? Are these the dying gasps of despair? Or is the groaning, the longing, somehow hopeful? To put it in Paul's language from Romans 8, is creation bound in futility, or are these groans birth pangs? For Paul, there is reason to hope. The futility creation experienced, and he credits that directly to Adam's actions, is turned to the long, slow process of birth of a restored creation because God intervened. Creation's song, as we heard last week, is indeed a beautiful song. But we must add to that, it is also a sorrowful song while remaining hopeful. If I might sum that all up, creation's song is the blues. The blues don't lie about pain or the things that have been lost. They're honest about that sort of thing. And the blues are hopeful. Am I the only one who has heard B.B. King's guitar Lucille wail? Or hear Billie Holiday lament through song and not feel somehow deeply alive and soothed? Am I alone in that regard? If so, y'all are missing out. so it is with creation's song, a groaning, longing, hope-filled song. But what is the reason for hope? What is the sign that creation could be restored? There are certainly plenty of signs to the contrary, that we're not willing to change our ways enough. And yet, for Paul in our passage from Romans 8, somehow, mysteriously, the sign is us. Those who have the first fruits of God's Spirit are a witness of what all of creation will experience. That is the work of the Spirit of restoration and life. I realize that so far just about everything I've said isn't particularly helpful, at least not for those who want to leave with some sort of call to action. I want to be clear what my call to action is not for you today. I'm not asking you to go out and donate to Iowa Interfaith Power and Light or some other group working to address climate change. Nor am I asking you to put solar panels on your roof or trade in a gas-guzzling car for an electric one, or even better, to walk or ride your bike more often. Again, those are all really great things, and maybe we should do all or some of them. But that's not what I'm asking you today. Instead, I would ask you to do what 16 of us did last night. And we went to natural places as we gathered for Terra Divina at Indian Creek Nature Center. And we listened for the places where creation sings. We particularly lifted up the places where creation grieves. I would say maybe where creation groans. You don't have to go to a special event. You don't need a facilitator for that sort of thing. Just go out to natural places and see if you can notice the signs of longing, groaning, and hope that they reveal. For those of us who worry about the kind of world that we are leaving for our children and grandchildren and the next generation, we need to hear some allies who care. As we go out and listen in to our own longings for God to set things right, we ought to also hear creation singing along. Hoping for the exact same things that we so desperately need. Amen.